And good morning, TCU alumni community. I am Rob Berline here with the TCU Alumni Association, and we are joined by Jessica Tyler. Jessica is the president of American Airlines Cargo Division and a vice president of Airport Excellence. She has many other things on her resume as well, which we will get into shortly. But Jessica, first, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be on with you today. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get into what happened when you were at TCU, you came at a bit of a different time than some students. You were not an undergraduate student. You joined as a graduate student after your graduation from Vanderbilt. So tell us about the time, your undergrad growing up. What kind of made you before you became a Horned Frog?
Well, I did grow up in the Dallas area and then went off to Vanderbilt University for my undergrad experience, had a great time. And then when I graduated, I had a math degree, a BS in mathematics, and I had grown up wanting to be a teacher. There was something about helping people realize their full potential that really got me going. So after Vanderbilt, moved to South Florida, spent about my 20s at a private school in South Florida called St. Andrews, where I was a high school math teacher and varsity volleyball coach. And was thinking about how do I, going back to that theme of optimizing potential in people, I wanted to do that for schools. So I wanted to become an administrator. Actually went back and got a master's degree at FAU in a year program, and was able to do that because I felt like I wanted to, maybe be a vice principal or eventually a principal, something like that. So then our path kind of took a turn. So my husband at the time was a club swim coach and a varsity swim coach at that school. That's where we met, St. Andrews. And he was wanting to get a master's degree and coach college. So he actually put out, his feelers, and Richard Sivasma, who's the head coach at TCU, I'll never forget this. We lived in Delray Beach at the time, and he had been contacted by two universities. One was West Virginia and one was TCU. And he happened to be out of town at a swim meet, and the phone rang. This was before cell phones. So I picked up the landline, and there was Richard with his big Texas accent asking if he could talk to Dave. And anyway, we ended up talking for almost an hour, me with his, girlfriend at the time. But it ended up that we went and visited, and for me, it was coming home. Right. So he accepted a graduate assistant's job with Richard, and started being an assistant coach for the swim team at TCU. And because I was moving from Florida to Texas as a teacher, I needed certification. And so I had already had a master's degree. I had all the right certifications for Florida. And so Richard hooked me up with a professor named Mike Sacken in the TCU education department, because I basically needed someone to sponsor me to sit for the Texas test, so I wouldn't have to take any more courses, could just test and get certified to teach and be an administrator in Texas. That conversation changed the course of my life, really. I have Mike Sacken to thank for that. We sat and chatted, and he agreed to sponsor me. Basically he had to put his name against, yep, I certify this woman can sit for the exam. But the conversation, when I walked into his office, he was literally working on a grant to fund an EdD MBA program at TCU. And he told me all about this program, and it was meant for developing great leaders in education. And that perked my ears up. And so that conversation was fascinating, and he told me all about it, and he was just getting started on the grant, and he asked me if I'd ever be interested in it. And I said, that sounds like so up my alley. I love school. So even though I already had a master's degree, I was thinking, gosh, that sounds so cool, an MBA and a doctoral degree. So went on with my life. He let me, he sponsored me to sit for my exam. I started teaching in Keller, one of the high schools in Keller, and then was an assistant principal at a middle school in Keller for a few years. And my phone rang, and it was Mike Sacken. This was maybe 2 years later. And he said, hey, you remember me? We got the grant, and we're starting this program. You want to be one of our students? And I said, oh my gosh, yeah. And it came with basically a full ride. So TCU, because of the grant, was able to fund a handful of students in program, and covered all expenses and gave you a living stipend so you could go full time. And how do you say no to that, right? Especially as a kind of a lifelong learner, and knowing that at that point in my career, I was an assistant principal and was really starting to think about that next level of influence, right? So I had dreams of potentially being a superintendent or getting into, the education realm in terms of the government, things like that. And so I basically quit my job and went full time to TCU. And the first part of the program was the MBA program. And then you also then started the doctoral work within your second year and into your third year. So I'll stop there, but it was literally a horn frog story where my husband was coaching with Richard, and that chance meeting with Mike turned into what would become a really career changing experience.
So you were able to go full time, different than a lot of graduate students that just show up on campus, 1 or 2 times a week, and I'll see you in another week. So tell about the experience as a student. How was it, having the full time graduate student load, and then going from MBA to EdD? That sounds like 2 different trains of thought.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Like I said, I think I could stay in grad school my whole life. What's the next degree that I could do? Just because I love learning and I love that learning environment. So showing up at the first kind of get together of the MBA program, I didn't know anybody. It'd been 10 years since I graduated from Vanderbilt, almost 10 years. And, being back in school full time felt weird, because when I did my degree at FAU, it was definitely, at nights and on weekends and things. And so being a full-time student was kind of a cool thing again, right? Even though I was probably several years older than most of my colleagues, but there were a few of us that were coming back, after having a decent amount of time in the real work world. But I loved it. The program was so well organized, and right away we were put in teams. Our team was called the Nerd Herd. I still have great contacts from those days, and every minute of it was just fascinating and interesting. And the MBA program itself would eventually also help me turn my career in a different direction. I can talk about that maybe at some point. And then it was great because the collaboration between the business school and the School of Education, where Mike, who was my primary contact within the EdD program, worked really closely. This was a new program, right? There was only one student slightly ahead of me, I think a semester or so ahead of me, who had tried this kind of dual degree program. So there was a lot of collaboration needed between the schools within TCU to sort of say, what are we doing with these students, right? In terms of making sure they have all the MBA requirements, but also it was meant to be a 3-year program, right? So you do your MBA, and then that second year of your MBA overlapped with the beginning of your doctoral work, and then your third year was primarily your dissertation work. So there was a lot of collaboration across the groups at TCU that made the experience phenomenal. So it was a fascinating experience, and still today is a fairly unique program. I think there are a few other programs out there, but TCU was certainly one of the first that said, hey, education leaders need a good foundation in business. And so I felt like that has served me really well in my career.
And so you're a student, and did you also get a chance to attend swim meets?
Yeah. Yes, my husband, as an assistant coach, we had a lot of Horned Frog swim meets, and he loved his TCU experience too. Actually, he just heard from Richard a couple of maybe a month or so ago. Richard reached out to see how he was doing, and Richard's kind of an icon around there. I'm sure some of the folks in the audience would know who he is, but an incredible program, and they took us in as family, right? While we were moving back to my hometown, my parents were over in Carrollton, but the Horned Frog community just made us part of the family right away, and it was a phenomenal experience for him that launched him into some new things too post that experience.
Yes, if we have any H2O frogs watching or fans of the H2O frog program, please put that in the comments, and we'll love to show your love for the H2O frogs. But after you're a student at TCU, you have to rejoin the working world.
Yeah.
So what was it like taking the MBA, EdD, and then figuring out how to, make a living with it?
So that was another fascinating kind of interesting winding road, right? So in our second year of our MBA program, recruiters from different companies come in and do a spiel, right, and tell you all about their great company and to get you thinking and recruit. And this woman from Gallup Inc. came in, and Gallup, for most people, know it as a kind of a survey research company. But they also do management consulting and are very well known in the space of selection instruments, engagement, and the interaction between employees and customers, right? How do you optimize the human interaction within a business? And so what I didn't know was they had all this research around engagement. And I didn't know that word at the time, but having been a teacher, my dissertation topic that I was starting to formulate was around how literally relationships are the most important contributor to achievement for kids. And if you can create those relationships one-on-one in a classroom, you can get kids to do and achieve amazing things and really reach their full potential. And so I didn't know what to call that, right? But hearing her stand up and talk about decades of research that Gallup had done on what engagement, this word engagement, today that word's obviously, we're very well known, but we're talking back in like 2004 or 5. So afterwards, we just chatted. I chatted her up, trying to understand what this research was and how could I learn more. And was not even thinking about a job. I was thinking about my dissertation. Right? I need good sources for this dissertation. And that conversation led into literally, eventually, first, it was going to be a partnership to do research together for my dissertation, and then it ended up being led to a job. So my third year, as I was working on my dissertation, I quickly moved out to Omaha, Nebraska, where their operations headquarters was. Started in their education division, which was focused on hiring and developing great teachers and principals. So they had all kinds of great research around that, but only was there 3 months. Some people might know this person named Tom Rath. He's written like StrengthsFinder 2.0 and the original StrengthsFinder. And I think TCU is actually a big StrengthsFinder user. So I was at Gallup in Omaha, Nebraska, sitting in a town hall meeting, had been there just a few months, and sat next to him. And we started chatting about, life and Gallup and careers. And literally a week later, he called me and said, "Hey, I want you to run our engagement practice. So come out of the education division and come help me, run this consulting line of business around engagement, where they work with companies to figure out, the right strategies around not only listening to through a survey the voices of team members, but also what do you do to create a culture where people can really thrive? What do they need every day when they show up to work?" And so, who says no to that? I didn't really know who he was at the time, but, ended up working for him for years and had an incredible experience there, learned a ton. So that was my sort of transition from the world of education. There was kind of a half step into this education consulting group within Gallup. And then that kind of parlayed into working with, Fortune 50 companies on, how do you build the right culture so that your team can take care of customers. So that's kind of where that came from. It doesn't even make any sense as I look back at 20 years. It's hard to explain kind of the winding path that my career has taken. But for the most part, it's just been always being open to doing what I love and finding those opportunities to apply that to something, really great work that feels good to wake up and do every day.
And so you're at Gallup running the engagement division, and then you get into American Airlines for a while. So
Yeah.
how'd you make the jump from a survey education thing to American Airlines?
You're picking up on all kinds of fun stories. So loved my job at Gallup. Absolutely. Ended up in a position of leading two of their consulting practices, one around engagement and one around well-being. And again, this is back in, the early mid parts of 2006, 7, somewhere in there. So a lot of it was pretty leading edge research and development, and had a great time, learned a lot. Well, at the same time, I had 3 boys under the age of 5. So over this period of time that I've been talking about, I graduated from TCU and had just had my baby, my first baby. Was pregnant the whole last semester of my 3rd year at TCU. And then quickly, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska, had this little 10-week-old, and had 2 more sons in Omaha. And after 7 or 8 years in Omaha, again, literally, it's kind of funny, the work I was doing around well-being and the research that Tom Rath was working on at the time led me to evaluate my life a lot more. So I had this job I loved, I had this great family, but there were things that just weren't adding up for me in terms of my overall well-being. So the work I was doing at Gallup actually sort of made me make some life decisions. So we decided that we really wanted to be somewhere warmer. That was key. We had 3 sons and under the age of 5, and thank God for basements in Omaha, Nebraska, because when it's cold, you can shove them down there and have them play and, jump around. But being indoors, 4 or 5 months of the year just wasn't our thing. My husband was from South Florida, so we needed to be somewhere, more southern, more warm. So we started to look back in the Dallas area. We had lived here during the time we were at TCU together and really loved, the area, and obviously have family here. And my husband, right after TCU, when he graduated, he was the head coach at South Lake Carroll. This is before we had kids. He was the head swim coach there for a while before the move to Nebraska. So we said, if we ever have kids, we want to move back to this great school district and be back in Dallas. So we did. We started looking, and he was the first to find a job back here. So he moved with my, at the time, I think, 8 or 9 month old, moved back here while I continued to search for a job. Well, I still had a really good friend from my time at TCU, Jen Dalio. She's someone you should have on this show, by the way. She's a phenomenal person. And she was at American at the time. And she said, I had my feelers out and I was looking for things. And I hadn't had to look for a job really that much in my, 10, 12 years. They all kind of happened. And so I had my feelers out, and she said, hey, there's this job at American that I think you would be really great at. It has to do with kind of transformation. And at the time, American was really struggling. I did a bunch of interviews, and it kind of went quiet. And American filed for bankruptcy. And this was kind of late 2011. And so I thought, well, my mom actually called and said, did you see the news this morning? American filed for bankruptcy. So there goes that job. She was all disappointed, thinking that, it was pretty close to happening. But well, the next day, the day after American filed for bankruptcy, the hiring manager called me and said, hey, I know this is kind of crazy, but do you still want to come work for American? And I knew what they were going through, right? So they were, filing for bankruptcy, trying to figure out how to restructure and rebuild an organization. And as a consultant and someone who had been around a lot of different companies, I felt like an anthropologist. Like I thought, God, what an amazing time to join an organization. Most people would think it's crazy, but I just saw opportunity everywhere in terms of, hey, I think I can get in and really help rebuild this iconic brand. That may have been naive of me to think I would have that much influence, but my first job at American was really because of the bankruptcy. The cargo division was doing this massive transformation of technologies. Well, because money was running out and resources were thin, we had to kind of unwind it, try to reap as much benefit out of it as we could, but we had to sort of off-ramp a bunch of consulting companies that were helping at the time because we couldn't afford it. And I had to build this small team that was going to try to salvage as much as possible out of the work that had been done, but that then redirect towards, efforts that would help through the restructuring. And that's kind of how I got into American. And ever since, it's kind of been one thing after the next, and it's been a fascinating 9 years.
And so you moved up and all the way to last July when you were named the president of the cargo division, vice president of airport excellence. Also, you're the first female president of the cargo division. How did that come about that you move all the way up to them naming you president?
Yeah, so from the very beginning, from that little tiny team where I started, to the evolution of different jobs I've had over the last 9 years, it's all been about really transformation and strategic work. So I very quickly, right after I started, because of the restructuring, reported to the president of cargo at the time. And every job I had since was really part of the leadership team of this nice little, in good years, $1 billion division, right? And so the work itself was very strategic in nature and always towards future growth and initiatives that were going to transform this, this part of the business. So those that are not familiar with the world of cargo, heavy logistics organization, basically when you fly as a passenger on American, down below you are not just bags. It's everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals to asparagus to you name it. We really help move the world's goods around every single day. And it's a fascinating business. And so the work was always around how do you leverage these really incredible assets, these beautiful aircraft, and the capacity that's below your feet as a passenger, to really partner with the world's leading logistics companies who are our customers. So when you think about our American Airlines Cargo customers, it's people like DHL, FedEx, UPS, the United States Postal Service. Those are our customers, and their customers are usually the manufacturers or shippers. So Apple, those types of organizations. And so the roles I've had have always just sort of grown and morphed, but have always been around the future of where we're headed and how are we leveraging our assets and optimizing the contribution we make to the overall airline. And so I don't know that 9 years ago, if you said, "Oh, you're going to be the president of cargo someday," that I would have thought that was going to happen. I have loved the teams I've gotten to work with. It goes back to that underlying thing I love, which is potential, and helping us figure out how to optimize potential, whether it's a person or a team or now an organization. How do you unify people towards progress? That's the thing that gets me excited. So somehow I was fortunate enough to step into this role last summer and have loved every minute of it. It's the team that I've grown up with the last 9 years, and this last year has been a fascinating time to be in the cargo business, especially at the airline when passenger loads are not quite what they used to be.
Well, you made my segue for me, because I was about to ask you. You step in as president, and you step in the middle of a global pandemic, is where you say the passenger load is down. But from the cargo standpoint, I'm really interested in hearing what are the different procedures you have to do in terms of how you handled equipment, how the people were able to interact with each other and do those things. So what has kind of been the biggest changes you've seen from a cargo side of the pandemic?
Yeah, so very early on, almost, honestly, a year ago, about 3 days ago, so March 20th, we flew our very first, what we call cargo only flight, meaning there's no passengers on board. We're still using our passenger aircraft, but no one's up top except for the pilots. And so right away, when we started pulling down the passenger schedule, kind of our first pull downs were in China, some of the early days of January, February, and then March, things drastically took a turn. You have to ask yourself, what strengths do we have, and can those strengths be put to good work, good use during a time like this when the world needs it? And the answer to that was 100% yes. The world's economy has to keep going. Goods have to keep moving. And so while there aren't any passengers wanting to fly right now, we have these incredible, expensive assets that are actually cheaper to keep going than to park, right? And so we had to figure out a way to work with our customers to say, we can still take everything that you need, right? If you imagine the dynamics of the industry, with all the commercial airlines pulling down capacity, your supply and demand is out of whack, right? So commercial cargo capacity becomes really valuable because it's just not as easy to get things on board. Our customers like FedEx, UPS, they all have airline operations, right? They move a lot of their own things, but they have a very point-to-point network, whereas a passenger network, we have dots on the map all over the place. We can get things pretty much anywhere in the world, and so we supplement. So we work with them to supplement their network where they can't reach it on their own efficiently. And so, early on, we said we've got to do this differently. We had to figure out, a different model. You can imagine as an airline, a passenger airline, all of your decision-making kind of matrix are based on passenger demand, and you lead with that. Well, in a time when there is no passenger demand, you have to really kind of flip what your inputs are into how you make those decisions. And so we worked really closely with a lot of the other departments like network planning, our integrated operations center, to figure out what markets, what aircraft, and where could we just optimize the heck out of this opportunity, this dire situation that the world was in, to make sure that we were playing a part in that. And today, I say we've now flown over 7,000 of these cargo only flights. And we're still asking ourselves, even as passenger demand, thankfully the last few weeks, there's quite a bit of optimism around the airline industry as people are starting to fly again, as vaccinations are getting out. We're still asking ourselves the right questions around, as long as the economics make sense, we'll continue to do these cargo only flights. As we start to ramp the passenger network back up, we'll have to get a little bit more surgical about where to do that. But as the passenger flight start to ramp back up, that's still capacity for us for cargo, because like I said before, underneath your feet on every flight, we're shipping mail and other important shipments around the world. So, to your question about equipment and how does it work, our customers, let's just take an example, like a DHL will show up and there's a couple different types of products or ways that they show up. One is they come with a packed pallet of stuff that's got the saran wrap around it, right? A big block of random boxes that they've put together. They're consolidators, so they take things from all over, put it together, pack it, and then they show up and bring it to us, where we screen it and we take it out to the aircraft. So the next time you are on a flight, hopefully the audience here will get back on airplanes soon. Look out your window and you can see these big, huge pallets of cargo getting loaded. Well, that could be, like I said, anything from asparagus to iPhones, right? On their journey somewhere in the world. And so we have on the airport property itself, most of you are in the airport itself, but we also have these big cargo terminals that have dock doors, and DHL or whoever will back their truck up, unload. We do a lot of handling. So if they haven't done the saran wrap process and they bring it in what we call bulk or just loose, we have a process to build those units up and screen it all for safety and FAA requirements, and then it goes out the back, which is on the air side, and pull it through with these trucks out to the gates. And then we have loaders, and the guys that load the bags that are loading your bag are also loading cargo and helping to get all the cargo on board before we take off on time.
Well, I always look when I'm going to Florida in a few weeks, and I look out the door. I always want to make sure my golf clubs got on. So
okay,
I see you find the golf clubs, but I don't always. I need to look for the asparagus. Next time I go in a few weeks.
Yeah.
But one of the things you guys have been shipping that everyone around the world is thankful for is you've been one of the leaders in shipping the vaccine. Obviously, this is a global pandemic, and so as you said, you can get anywhere in the world. With shipping the vaccines, what has been the communication you've had with the government and the places it has to go to? Has this been more of a special operation than things you've had to do in the past?
It's a little bit of a mix. So in one way, I can describe it as we're doing what we do every day. right? We ship vaccines, flu vaccines, we ship all kinds of pharma all the time. So we have really great processes that are actually certified by a governing body to almost like ISO 9000, right? So you have this standard process that meets these really specialized requirements. And so we call it our temperature controlled product, right? So you have this cold chain from the time that the integrator drops it off all the way to delivery. You've got to have processes in place to make sure you don't have excursions and temperature, and that you're doing everything you can to make sure things stay the temperature they're supposed to. So the vaccines in that way are no different. We do that all the time, every day. And so again, we're able to very quickly at the beginning, in the very beginning, we focused a lot on PPE and other pandemic related shipments, right? To make sure that we could help get masks and other things where they needed to go. And then in the beginning, it was vaccine trials. So we were helping companies move vaccine trials to the actual trial participants. So you have to ship them things and they have to do their thing and then you send it back, right? And so in the beginning, our focus was around working with our customers, again, the DHLs, the FedExes, the UPSs of the world, who their customers are typically the Pfizers and the pharmaceutical companies. And that quickly transitioned as soon as the first vaccine was approved. It quickly transitioned to making sure that we had the processes in place to ensure that these very special shipments got to the destination safely. And so there was a ton of collaboration. So while I say it's something we do every day, in this case, because of the importance of these shipments to the world's recovery. So this wasn't just about getting flu vaccines somewhere, right? This was, we have got to get people vaccinated as quickly as possible. So the, like I said, the UPSs, FedExes, those customers of ours, us, and the government group, the OWS, Operation Warp Speed, we had several calls early on amongst the different groups involved to ensure that we all could play our part really well, right? Because the handoffs were important, the security, right? The early on we heard about things like black market for vaccines, so you had to have extra eyes on things and extra security. So it was a really interesting collaboration throughout the beginning days, and now it's really almost routine. It's not routine in the sense that it's not special, but we've got it fine-tuned now. And so much like I described before, commercial airlines like American supplement what UPS and DHL and FedEx and others can't deliver themselves. So you'll see us carrying vaccines to places in the Caribbean, in Latin America, where our network is really strong, sort of to destinations that the typical DHL plane that you might see flying around isn't landing. Right. So we're working really closely to fill out that global network and do our part in getting vaccines where they need to go.
And you talked about the cold chain and some of the Pfizer vaccine is, I believe they said, stored up to like 94 below zero. Is that something different that you guys have had to work with before? Is that colder than some of the vaccines?
Yes.
And how do you make sure that, it's 94 below zero and the cargo thing so other things don't freeze?
Yeah. Our job is to make sure it's maintained. So Pfizer developed their own packaging to last a certain number of hours so that it could be in transit and not have the temperature dip below. So that special packaging, our job is to make sure that nothing happens to that during its journey, and that we're able to maintain that kind of temperature, because it is definitely way lower than most of our pharmaceuticals that we ship.
And also in January and February, when this was starting out, and even still now, is the people on the news, we were hearing about different shipments, and we didn't know how much amounts were going out, and we were told it was going to be 2,000 or something one week, and then it might only be 500. From a cargo standpoint, were you seeing the differentiations in the fluctuation and knowing amounts? Because you guys have to be very precise and know exactly how much is going to be on.
Yeah.
So what was your guys' planning from that perspective?
Yeah. So again, I would say that close communication, daily, multiple times a day communication with our partners to know what was coming, when it was coming, how much of it was coming, has been and still is very critical, right? There is dry ice used in the process for some of the vaccines, and with a passenger aircraft, you have limitations on how much dry ice you can have for air quality, and it's considered a dangerous good. So we've gone through the process of making sure that we have the right limits, and that, like you said, you have to know how much is coming and how close you are to that limit, so that you can make sure to accommodate what is coming and provide that service. So it's still, even today, there if you have read up on things, the manufacturing process is just not where it needs to be to get as many vaccines in arms as possible. But again, I'd say in the last couple of weeks, I've seen good news on that front, that production is getting to where it needs to be to do mass distribution. So everything that all the conversations we're in have us looking at it pretty much now through the end of the summer being really peak times for volumes of vaccine to be coming through.
And a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, when the people get immunized, then, we can worry about the travel part of it. But how long in your cargo division are you planning on having to ship specifically these vaccines? Are you anticipating this for years to come, or have you been given a timeline?
I think it's years to come. I think obviously the focus right now is in this initial distribution effort. But I think there's a lot of belief that this will become a routine vaccination that people will be required to have every, whatever intervals. So it will become like what we do now, is the flu vaccine has its cycles of when we ship it and where it's going. I anticipate that there'll be some similar approach to this vaccine.
Mm-hmm. And on to, as we get out of the pandemic, what do you see as kind of the future for the airline industry? I guess more specifically over the next 12 months, as travel hopefully starts to ramp up, and you guys are still managing now more passenger loads as well as continuing your cargo load.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and one that I think every investor is actively seeking an answer to. But I would say, like I mentioned a little bit ago, the last several weeks, there's definitely an uptick in optimism around here at work, as we are inviting more and more customers back to flying. To hear that you're going to Florida in a few weeks is great news to my ears. But I saw a headline this morning that there was over 1.5 million passengers yesterday or the day before. And that's the highest number in over a year. So people are ready, right? They're ready to explore the world and see people face to face. And I think the news of the vaccine getting out, I think the cases in certain parts of the world that are really dropping off, which is fantastic. Obviously, there's still some places where it's very critical. But all of that combined, along with some of the political decisions, that are being made either at the state or federal level around opening things back up. Here in Texas, obviously it's you wouldn't know we were in the middle of a pandemic as you walk around, but all of that is giving people, I think, the confidence to get back on an airplane. And obviously, the teams here are working hard to welcome customers back, ensuring that we have a program called the Clean Commitment, where our facilities and aircraft, and not only for our team members, but obviously for customers as well, are very focused on making sure that the environment you walk into from curb to curb is healthy, and one in which does not increase your odds of contracting the virus. So that commitment continues. The focus will also be, you might have seen some news that American was in the headlines this last week around the touchless experience, right? So We think and believe that, not only for convenience and speed, but also for health reasons. The less you touch, the less you have the chance of picking something weird up along the way, whether it's coronavirus or something else. And so American is really leading the way in that touchless experience. And we're really excited to also be offering things like Verify, which if you plan to travel, especially as we open back up international markets, having Verify, which is kind of a health wallet where you can, you house sort of test results or soon vaccine, proof of vaccine and things like that. That will also be just an easy way for people to move about the world. And so I think American is really ready for the passenger demand to come back. And we're really seeing very good signs that people are ready. Well,
that is a sign everyone is wanting, and I know I'm really excited to get on that. I did get my Johnson & Johnson shot a couple weeks ago. So I'm fully vaccinated when I get on that American Airlines plane here in a few weeks.
I love it.
But having been around DFW, we'll get away from the airport, and you grew up in DFW, you've been around here a while. What is your favorite spot when you're not in the airport to go around DFW?
Gosh, I have 3 sons. They're now 15, 13, and 10. And if I'm not on a lacrosse field or at a swim meet, we love being outside. So we spend a lot of time in and around like Grapevine, different parks. We have a dog. We're out with our dog doing, trail walks and things like that. So I think Dallas specifically has a ton of great spots and to be outside and enjoy the weather. And gosh, these last few weeks post our, snowmageddon that we had a few weeks ago that unfortunately impacted a lot of folks. This is some of my favorite days of the year right now, where it's just, I'm looking behind me. It's a beautiful blue sky day. I don't know what the temperature is, but somewhere in the 70s, 60s. This is the best time to be outdoors in Texas.
It's a lot better than 24 hours ago when I'm sure you had a lot of flights canceled due to all the storms.
Yes. I'm pretending that didn't happen, but we're pretty used to it in DFW. Our operations team here knows that Texas weather is nutty. Thunderstorms 1 minute, ice the next, and blue skies and golf weather the next. So
that's right.
We have incredible teams that are ready for all those different operational situations.
And we'll end with this, where we started with TCU. How often do you get a chance to come back to the TCU campus?
Oh my gosh, not enough. I will be honest, not enough. I was actually there last. One of my sons was, my oldest son was named to the Duke Talent Program, and I think there was a ceremony on the TCU campus. This was probably 2 years ago. And we took some nice pictures around the fountain that's in your background here, and walked around a little bit. We've made it to a couple sports, either basketball or football over the years. But I'll tell you what, so the last time that we were there for that event, I was lost. And the event was somewhere right near Neely. And I was driving around thinking, I think this is the parking lot I used to park in, but it sure looks different, right? All of the great development and new buildings are fantastic and beautiful. So I probably need to come by. I talked to Peggy Conway, and I exchanged a couple of emails recently, and I said I need to get back over to TCU more often for sure.
Yes, Neely just finished its construction project last fall, so definitely come by. And any alumni watching, if you were to the Neely School or you just want to see all the great things going around TCU, go by the old Neely where you took classes or where you thought the classes would be. It's a whole new experience.
Right. Yes.
Well, Jessica, we want to thank you so much for taking time out of your morning. You are such an instrumental part, not only our community, but basically the world getting back to normal. So thank you for all you do.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Have a great day, and go Frogs.
Go Frogs.